Welcome to Tiny Show and Tell Us, the bonus series where you write in with your favorite science news or factoid, we read your email aloud, and then we dive deeper. I'm Sam Jones, and I am here with my co-host, Deboki Chakravarti, as always. But today, we've got a guest. Our guest is science writer Emily Schneider, who is also my colleague at ACS. Hi, Emily. How's it going?
Hello. It's going well. Thank you so much for having me.
We're glad you're here. This should be lots of fun.
So to catch everybody up, last time we did this, we talked about fairy tale phylogenies, and we also talked about the debate over how old Greenland sharks are. We had a real old history kind of day.
Yeah, we did.
As a reminder, if you have a story you'd like for us to cover on Tiny Show and Tell Us, all you have to do is email tinymatters@acs.org, or you can fill out the form linked in the episode description.
So before we get into anything, something that I meant to bring up the last Tiny Show and Tell Us, or maybe even multiple before that, is that we had an episode where we were talking about yeast. You and I, Deboki, were like, there's got to be like a brewery that focuses on yeast, or maybe you go to like a wine tasting and the focus would be yeast as opposed to like what you typically encounter. And so we had two listeners write in about the same place, and it's in San Diego. So like I should have known about this because I lived in San Diego for 5 years, and it definitely existed then.
But so you hadn't heard of this place
No.
at all? I'm excited.
It's called White Labs. And so one of the listeners, Kyle, wrote in and said, their tasting room makes pairs of beers where the only difference is the strain of yeast. You can sit at the bar and taste what the difference in yeast is with minimal other variables.
That's so satisfying to even just like imagine.
That is very cool.
I know. And then the other listener who wrote in, Michelle, said, White Labs also provides tours of the wet lab they have attached to the tasting room and often host trivia nights that attract lots of scientists that work at the biotech companies in the area. I definitely recommend swinging by if you're in San Diego area, maybe even for a Tiny Matters meetup in the future. So yes, Michelle, I love that idea.
Yeah, White Labs, reach out to us. We're ready.
Fly us out. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Michelle. Next time I'm in San Diego visiting friends, I will be making a pit stop there. Okay. Deboki, do you want to kick off the first Tiny Show and Tell today?
Yeah. I have a message from listener Cecilia who wrote, March is Autoimmune and Endometriosis Awareness Month. It's interesting to see the new research coming out, such as new blood tests for endo and the Nobel Prize for the FOXP3 gene. So first off, Cecilia mentioned the Nobel Prize for FOXP3. This is a protein that plays a huge role in autoimmune disease because one of its job is to control regulatory T cells. I feel like it's a very like Who Watches the Watchmen kind of situation. Their job is to make sure that your immune system isn't going to attack your own body. So this protein is super important for that. But today, we're going to focus on the other part of Cecilia's message, which is about endometriosis and blood tests to detect it. Endometriosis isn't an autoimmune condition, but it does involve the immune system. It's a chronic condition where tissues that are similar to the lining of the uterus grow outside of the uterus. And because the body is like thrown off by that, this can cause inflammation. It can cause scar tissue to form, and it can be really painful.
Incredibly.
Yeah, I think like one of the classic ways that I've heard, I guess, of people realizing that they might have endometriosis is people who have really, really terrible menstrual cramps might realize. And then another time that I've heard like people kind of realizing they might have endometriosis is when it pops up in particular with like fertility issues. It might become like one of the possible avenues people explore that could be explaining these fertility issues.
Right.
So treatments can involve pain medication. They can involve hormone therapies, things like hormonal contraceptives, I think are supposed to be really helpful, particularly with those painful periods. And people might also have surgery to remove the tissues. In some cases, I think this is not as common now. I think it's considered maybe more of an extreme case now. But I did read that some people will have a hysterectomy to actually remove the uterus.
Right.
But that is like a much more involved procedure and has a lot more that you have to deal with after as well.
Right. When I've heard of people who need to do that or cases where that happens, it's because they've gone through a number of surgeries.
Yeah.
And what happens is that tissue that grows outside the uterus like keeps coming back. And it's like typical that it can take only 6 months for it to grow back. So it's awful. And yeah, it's a huge number of people who deal with this. And I think like that's beginning to be talked about more. But anyway.
No, for sure. I mean, so endometriosis can happen to anyone with a uterus. According to the WHO, it affects around 10% of reproductive age women worldwide. So that's around 190 million women. But it can take years to get a diagnosis. I saw one number was like sometimes up to 11 years. And there's a lot of factors behind that, and I think a lot of them are unfortunately really familiar ones. So one thing is like the pain around periods is so normalized that people will be really dismissive both of other people's pains but also of their own pain. You might just think, well, like periods are supposed to be terrible, like that's why I'm so uncomfortable. And it's really easy, I think, to diminish that given that we talk about periods this way as if the pain should be so normal.
Right.
It can also be really difficult to talk about that pain with doctors because there's a stigma around talking about periods in general. There's also historically a lot of issues of doctors brushing aside this kind of pain and not knowing enough about endometriosis. So just like the initial step of even getting potential help for this is so difficult, and it just like really exacerbates the problem of getting a diagnosis. But there are methods to get an endometriosis diagnosis. It typically involves a pelvic exam, a transvaginal ultrasound, and then most often a laparoscopy. So this is like considered the gold standard. There's involves having tiny incisions and a scope called a laparoscope to look for endometrial tissue outside of the uterus. And so what was interesting, Sam, you did the research for this episode, you found that there is an established blood test called the CA125 test. And it's not strictly an endometriosis test. It looks for a blood protein called cancer antigen 125 or CA125, which is a tumor marker found on certain gynecological cancers. But it can also be used to find a specific protein in the blood of women who have endometriosis. One of the challenges with this blood test is that that marker can also go up during pregnancy, during menstruation, and other diseases, including, of course, cancer.
Right.
And so currently there's like no standard universally accepted routine blood tests for endometriosis, but there have been some blood tests that are kind of going through the process of like people working on them and seeing can they work. And so you found this, the first commercial non-invasive blood test in the US was launched by Kefra Diagnostics, and it looks at two blood biomarkers, BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and CA125. So these are markers that are found to be higher in the blood of women with endometriosis. And so it combines the results of this blood test with the clinical history, uses an algorithm to kind of like report positive, negative, but it's considered a high specificity rule-in test. So that means that if you get a positive, it's like very, very likely that you have endometriosis. And there are other commercial tests, but again, not universally accepted. So people are working to try to find more biomarkers to basically see, like, can we find a test that will be able to actually help people get this diagnosis for endometriosis without maybe having to go through all of these other procedures, or help get like a diagnosis like a lot faster. I imagine if we had a good blood test, maybe it would make jumping to the next step a lot easier.
Testing right now for endometriosis is pretty invasive, right? Like at the very least, you need to have some sort of pelvic exam. So if you're someone who's like, look, I'm experiencing XYZ pain and there's a blood test available, it could be like, okay, let's first do this blood test. And like, it doesn't mean that we won't necessarily do the other stuff if it comes back negative. But if this is coming back positive, then maybe we can skip certain steps that are more invasive, or, you know, whatever it may be.
Right.
I could see that. And I also think the biomarker stuff is cool because it's really the more biomarkers you have, the better.
Yeah. And so like one of the ones you found too is also a team at Yale had found like these specific microRNAs in patients. So I think also the fact that we're like expanding the type of biomarkers we can find is like hopefully going to also expand the markers that we can look for.
Mm-hmm. Emily, do you feel like you've been hearing more about endometriosis in recent years? Because I feel like I have, but maybe I'm also like the algorithm now knows that I'll watch videos of people talking about their diagnosis experience or like research.
Yeah, I feel like it was something I was not at all familiar with. And then I had learned what it was and was like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is something I should have learned about a lot sooner in my life.
Right.
Yeah.
Just as a person who menstruates, you should know these things. Like, if this is this a normal level of pain? Is this I need to see a doctor level of pain? And the stigma around, what's a normal amount of pain is, I feel like it's so important to know, like, no, this could be an issue that I need. This is way bigger than that. And the fact that the diagnostic techniques are so invasive is, a huge reason why people don't. They just would rather just deal with it. It's probably not that big of an issue. I don't want to get a bunch of incisions made in my body. I'd rather just deal with this.
Right.
So anything like that for, biomarker based blood tests, I feel like I see research on that sort of stuff all the time. And this is a fantastic application of it. So very excited to see where this goes.
This actually just reminds me of a tiny show and tell us we did a little while ago about von Willebrand's disease.
Yeah.
I just realized this is going to come off so random at first. I was reading a Reddit thread the other day. One of my favorite subreddits to read is the Best of Redditor updates. It's like just stories from Reddit that get up, like people like find them in other subreddits and bring them back in, and they have updates. So you get like you can sometimes get sagas. And one of them was this guy who was taking care of his sister, and like she's having this period that suddenly gets really, really heavy, and she's bleeding like clots, and she's like really uncomfortable, really painful. And at first he's like, but aren't periods supposed to be painful? But clearly clueless, but also very well meaning, and like really takes it seriously when people on Reddit are telling him like, you gotta take her to the hospital. And she finds out there that she has von Willebrand's disease, and it's also a genetic disease. And so she, through that, her brother also found out he had it, but her mom also found out she had it, and her whole life had been told like, no, your periods are just heavy sometimes.
Whoa.
Like, sometimes there's, right? Like,
Emily, this is a bleeding disorder we talked about. So it's
Okay,
not
yeah.
hemophilia. It's, I think, actually the most frequent inherited bleeding disorder. And it actually affects, it says, according to the CDC, up to 1% of the general population, which is a lot of people.
yeah,
It's a lot of people.
we could talk here forever about the challenge of like getting people to take this seriously.
Ugh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so my tiny show and tell us is from listener Nick. And Nick wrote to us saying, my show and tell topic is a bit different from the chemistry and biology topics you often cover, but it does have a tiny aspect. Broadly, the topic is about subsynchronous resonance on the electric power grid. Subsynchronous refers to frequencies below the nominal 50 or 60 hertz of power systems. I'll go ahead and call them tiny frequencies. Love that, Nick. The issue first started to get attention in the 1970s when the resonance between a series capacitor interacted with the natural inductance of the power grid. This is known as subsynchronous resonance, or SSR. This resonance coincided with a resonant frequency of the turbine shaft of the nearby Navajo generating station. The resonance caused the shaft to fatigue much more quickly until it failed.
Whoa.
Today, the resonance of turbine shafts is getting more attention related to AI data centers, as these can produce frequencies on the power grid at these same subsynchronous frequencies. It's an ongoing challenge for engineers to identify and prevent those resonances. An analogy I like is if you tap a bell lightly, but keep tapping it over and over, it can ring louder and louder. That becomes the challenge for managing resonances like this, because even a small excitation of it can eventually cause damage. As this email sat in my drafts, I also came across this Instagram reel from a reporter covering the sound from data centers. Sound and how it travels through things and affects humans is also a really interesting topic to me. Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Nick. So I think Nick did a really good job of explaining subsynchronous resonance, but this is so outside my wheelhouse that it still took me some time to like parse, to look up. I was like, what is a turbine shaft? What is this thing? What is that thing? Right. So I'm going to just really simply explain it, and hopefully this will be helpful to listeners. Duboki, I assume it might be helpful to you because we're kind of on the same wavelength here.
I was really flattered that Nick thought I knew what a turbine shaft is.
Same.
You said resonance, and I started getting a little scared.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
okay.
about my knowledge level of this sort of thing.
Okay. So as I understand it, and again, Nick, write us in again if you're like, whoa, you oversimplified way too much. But as I understand it, subsynchronous resonance, it's this phenomenon in electric power systems where you have these electrical oscillations in the power grid that will start to match, or that will match, a natural vibration frequency of a generator shaft. So a generator shaft, it's that like heavy, typically massive steel rod that will link a turbine to an electrical generator. And so the issue arises when they start operating at the same frequency. I was like, I don't know enough about frequencies to know why that's bad. Like, whatever. Yeah, we're at the same frequency. But what happens is that causes the vibration in the generator shaft to grow until it starts to really go through this like mechanical stress. It can get damaged. That's really dangerous. So like it can experience mechanical stress. It can develop cracks in it that can cause electrical outages. It's not good. So I think the big issue for me was that I didn't understand how different wavelengths can interfere with each other or sort of like compound and then create mechanical stress, which is just kind of interesting.
I'm like having flashbacks now to learning about resonant frequency, because there have been like bridges that have broken from like resonant frequency. Like this is like the electric power grid version of that, I assume.
Right. Yes.
Oh, so
yes.
wild.
That's my understanding. Nick, you did a great job, but we just don't even know what turbine shafts are, so we had to take a step back.
No, but I love, Nick, your like comparisons were so good. I really appreciate that bell thing. Was like, okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah, where you're tapping it, but then it just keeps getting louder and louder. Right, like that's what's happening. Like you have this building mechanical stress because of this resonance, synchronous resonance.
That's so interesting.
As for the impact of AI data centers, like Nick mentioned, they can produce these subsynchronous frequencies. Moreover, like AI data centers, they can trigger these fast, really variable power demands. There are a lot of black boxes here related to human health. You know, the more that I'm learning, the worse it looks. But generally, right, they cause pollution. They're eating up tons of fossil fuels to function. They consume millions of gallons of water daily for evaporative cooling. That is having a big effect on drinking supplies. I was reading an article where someone was talking about how they have to bring in water, not just to drink, but like to even be able to flush their toilets because the water pressure is so low because they're using up so much water at these AI data centers. You have chronic noise pollution that can cause sleep disruption. It can cause a lot of other things. So the video that Nick sent, I'm going to link to in the sources, but it's about a hum that's coming from a Microsoft data center in Wisconsin. It's a news clip. And yeah, and the communities that are impacted are typically, of course, rural, right? You need space for it, but they're also typically lower income. So yeah, we need to keep asking questions, being skeptical. Let's be good scientists about understanding these AI data centers and their many, many impacts, including subsynchronous resonance. So thank you so much, Nick. That is fascinating. And I feel like I kind of like get it now, and it's empowering.
Yes. Yeah. We're not acting like we're idiots because we're idiots. We're acting like idiots because we're learning, and that's the fun part.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess I shouldn't be speaking on your behalf. Like I'm saying for me, my own feeling of like.
At this point, Boki, after this many years, you can speak on my behalf. You know,
it's true.
All right, Emily, I'm so excited. What did you bring us today for your tiny show and tell us?
My tiny show and tell us is a bit of research that I found. It is being presented at the fall meeting, and it's researchers who have found a way to turn plastic waste into cookies.
Everything should become cookies. This is exciting. This is the best news I've gotten all day.
Literally like turning trash into treats and treasure, right? The science writers here today, yes, we go through a lot of research. This was one I was like, this seems like magic. What are we doing? But essentially, it is a process where they take plastic waste, but also biomass, something called corn stover, which is like the leftovers, stalks and leaves from corn harvesting, a bunch of garbage. And they put it through this process that breaks down the materials into their base building blocks. They take those base building blocks and they feed it to microbes. So you were talking at the start about yeast. And I was like, this is perfect because I'm going to talk about yeast because they've genetically engineered these yeasts to take the building blocks from the plastic and the biomass and convert it into like proteins and fats and acids and stuff that goes into food and stuff that you can eat.
Wow.
So I have a background in biochemistry. This is like the most biochemistry thing I think I've ever heard of, like taking a water bottle and turning it from, polyethylene terephthalate into little building blocks and then feeding them to a yeast, and the yeast is like, okay, I made you a protein, or I made you vanilla flavoring, or I made you beta carotene, which are all things that they have done. And after you get your little microbe pieces, they have put some other stuff into it to make it more like food-like, and they've actually been 3D printing their cookies right now, and they're called microbites with the letter mu in the front. So it is, very scientific. And I think the funniest thing about this is that this is how science can be sometimes. They haven't yet done taste tests because they're not allowed yet.
No.
I know. I'm so sorry. But they've done some sensory tests where they give people the cookies and they can smell them and they can touch them. Not allowed to eat them. But in those sensory tests, 80% of the panelists said that they would probably or definitely eat the cookie in a place where food was limited.
Okay. So if you were stranded on a desert island and I handed you this cookie, would you eat it?
Would you eat it? Not maybe the most glowing recommendation yet, but this was sort of the first round. So they're now working on making the sort of food additives as well with the microbes. So they're teaching other yeasts how to make vanillin out of the biomass, so vanilla flavoring. And they've made beta carotene from the ethylene glycol, which is present in the plastic, which adds a little bit of orangey color. It's a vitamin A precursor, so it will improve the nutritional content of the cookie.
Okay.
So trying to make it into less of a desperate time situation, more into I would actually choose to eat this.
When you said, it's like I would eat this if there was limited food, or, I'm like, that's the worst Yelp review ever for a restaurant.
Right. Yeah. But I think to me, it feels such a sciencey thing of like, if food was limited, would you probably or definitely eat this?
I mean, the flip side to me is like, what they should be asking is like, if you saw this cookie just on a table, would you eat it? Because like, I know, and I shouldn't say this on a podcast where everyone, like my enemies can hear this, but like literally I would be the easiest person to poison, because like all you have to do is put a cookie on a table and say it's free and I'll eat it.
It's hard to say no.
And so like, even this cookie, I'm like, if you put it on a table, I will eat it.
Yeah. I mean, from the pictures, if you put it on a plate in front of me and you told me nothing, I probably would be like, okay, yeah.
We will link to the press release so people can see an image of this cookie. I saw a photo of it earlier, and I feel like it kind of looked like one of the like Pepperidge Farms round cookies that has like a little bit of a hole in the center. It looks like that to me.
It looks, it's like a little, almost like a cutout cookie. Maybe a little bit crisper. I think some important context is that the research was first done under something called the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge, which was this program designed to, inspire scientists to design systems that would feed astronauts theoretically on deep space missions, long-term missions, with minimal resources and minimal waste. So that was kind of the impetus, was like, okay, if we had to fit this into like I think it's a 1 meter square box, they had like very specific rules. So we have to fit it into this box and it has to, sustain astronauts. What could we do? Well, what if we turned plastic waste or stuff like that into something edible? So that was sort of the initial idea. And that's obviously a very resource limited situation, right? If you're on a spaceship.
Yeah.
But the goal is, the work doesn't require space to work. This works on Earth just as well. And it could be used in places here on Earth with minimal resources. So they're envisioning, ideally someday, could this be something that's like deployed to disaster zones or helping feed people in very resource limited areas or on submarines or things like that, as well as, the science fiction-y goal of, if we're going to Mars, we're going to the moon base that we're building. Like, what are we going to eat on the way there? So it's both a science fiction-y sort of thing and then also very grounded here on Earth, I would say.
I like that. I just want more ways to eat cookies. But it's probably important that it has like a role beyond just like my sweet tooth.
I mean, but if it's a way to use up plastic waste too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's very much prototype, but that's that's part of it. If we can use what is otherwise a waste stream to turn it into something edible, I think that's a really noble goal. And it's all the magic is in the microbes, and they're very clever, and they're being very well programmed, to break these pieces apart and build them up into new stuff. And the microbes are having a great time doing it, it seems. So
yeah.
I'm just imagining an astronaut in deep space, and just someone brings out more plastic bottles, and they're like, oh my God, no more cookies. No, like, please, can we have something else for snack?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was amazing. And also thank you to Nick and Cecilia for submitting to Tiny Show and Tell Us, a bonus series from Tiny Matters, created by the American Chemical Society and produced by Multitude.
As always, you can send us an email to be featured in a future Tiny Show and Tell Us episode, tinymatters@acs.org, or you can fill out the form that we always link in the episode description. We'll see you next time.